The charity ball at the Beaumont was the kind of evening where every floor had been polished twice, and every guest polished even more carefully than the floors. Crystal chandeliers spilled gold across the marble. A string quartet glided through a slow waltz, and along the upper balcony, a velvet banner unfurled in deep ivory letters. Tonight we honor a $9 million gift to the city's children's hospital. Every child deserves a chance. Charlotte Vale stepped through the brass doors at exactly 8 minutes past 8, in a deep navy gown she had sewn with her own hands. And the moment she crossed the threshold, a billionaire on the far side of the room turned, looked at her, and laughed. It was not a quiet laugh. It was the laugh of a man who knew he was being watched, and who wanted to be watched even more. "Did the dress code change?" Adrian Sterling said, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. "Or is Charity Night thrift shop themed this year?" A small wave of nervous, obedient laughter rippled around him. 2 women near the bar lowered their flutes. A waiter pretended to be very interested in a tray of canapes. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone went up and quietly began to film. Charlotte heard him. She did not flinch. She did not look at him. She walked the length of the ballroom the way she always did, with her shoulders low and her chin level. And when she reached the donor table, she set her clutch down, smoothed the embroidered cuff of her gown, and asked the hostess where she could leave a coat for a friend who was running late. She did not look back. That was the thing he could not understand about her, and the thing he would think about for the rest of his life. She had not flinched. Adrian watched her walk away. He told himself he had only meant it as a joke. He told himself that he had been bored, that the ballroom was full of women in identical satin who were trying too hard, and that something about the simplicity of her dress had irritated him in a way he could not name. He told himself a great many things, very quickly, the way men do when they suspect they have already done something wrong. His best friend, Dominic Park, leaned in beside him, with the particular weariness of a man who had spent 8 years watching Adrian Sterling step into puddles. "Tell me you didn't just say that out loud." It was a joke. It was not a joke. "She didn't even hear me." "She heard you. The waiter heard you. The cellist heard you. The cellist's mother heard you. And the cellist's mother is in Lisbon." Adrian rolled his glass slowly between his fingers and tried to look amused. He was 28 years old, 6'1", dark-haired, sharp-jawed, and unfairly handsome in the way that the heirs of certain New York fortunes tend to be when they have spent their entire lives standing at the front of every room. His tuxedo had been cut for him in Milan. The only ornament he wore was a pair of small platinum cufflinks, engraved with his older brother's initials, JBS. And even those he tucked under his sleeves, so no one would ask. He looked across the ballroom at the woman in the navy dress, and could not, for some reason, look away. "Who is she?" he asked. Dominic glanced over. "I don't know. She came in alone." "She came in alone to a $9 million gala." "Yes, Adrian, people do attend galas alone. Sometimes they even attend without a billionaire on their arm." Adrian made a small, dismissive noise and turned back to the bar, but he watched her in the mirror behind the bottles, and he saw the way she lifted her chin when an older woman crossed the room and embraced her, and the way her face changed completely when she smiled. He had not noticed, when she walked in, that her face could do that. He had noticed only the dress. Across the room, Charlotte sat down beside Margaret Hollis, the Foundation's chairwoman, and let the older woman fuss over her for exactly 30 seconds before pulling away. "Charlie, sweetheart, I heard him." "Heard who?" Charlotte said, although she knew. "Don't pretend with me. The Sterling boy. The whole side of the ballroom heard him. You should sit down. You should let me have him removed." "You can't have him removed, Margaret. He owns 4 floors of this hotel." "I can certainly try." "Don't." Charlotte slid her clutch closer to her plate. The clutch was old, navy satin, and it had been her grandmother's. "He doesn't matter." "He does matter," Margaret said. which was true, and they both knew it. Margaret Hollis was 64, silver-haired, soft in the eyes and merciless in the boardroom, and she had been Eleanor Vale's closest friend for 40 years. She had watched Charlotte grow up between her grandmother's textile mill and her grandmother's library. She had watched the foundation be born in that library, on the green leather sofa, with 2 cups of cold tea between them. She had watched Eleanor die 3 winters ago, and leave everything she owned to a quiet granddaughter who refused to put her name on a building. She had watched Charlotte sew the navy gown herself in the upstairs sitting room of the brownstone, 3 weeks of evenings, by lamplight, tracing constellations along the hem with silver thread, the way Eleanor had taught her when she was 9. So when Margaret said, "He matters," it was not because she cared about Adrian Sterling. It was because she knew exactly what the dress was, and she knew Charlotte would not tell anyone in the room. "Charlie," she said softly, "you can leave. We don't need you here tonight. You announce the gift in 20 minutes. I can announce it without you." "Margaret," Charlotte said, and finally she looked up, and her eyes were the clear, level grey of a winter river. "I'm not going home because a man laughed at my dress. I'm here for the kids. I'm staying for the kids." Margaret reached across the white linen and took her hand for one quick squeeze, and then released it before anyone could see. "All right, sweetheart. Stay. But if he comes near you, I'm putting his shoes in the fountain." Charlotte laughed for the first time that evening. It was a small laugh, low and dry, but it was real. And across the ballroom, a man at the bar saw her laugh and felt something move strangely in his chest. He did not know yet that she had hurt him. He did not know yet that she had decided, very calmly, somewhere between the brass doors and the donor table, that she was going to forgive him for it. Not because he deserved it, because forgiveness was lighter to carry than its opposite, and she had already carried enough. He did not know any of that. He only knew that he wanted to know her name. The seating chart, when it was finally consulted, produced a small, perfectly ordinary disaster. Adrian Sterling had been placed at table 4. Charlotte Vale had been placed at table 4. They were seated at adjacent chairs, and nobody at the foundation, including Margaret, knew this had happened, because the seating chart had been done by a junior coordinator who had only been told to put donors in the front and Sterling's near a microphone. The waltz drifted into something slower. The lights dimmed by 1 warm degree. Across the ballroom, Adrian Sterling lifted his glass to drain it, glanced down at the place card in his hand, and saw the name printed in small black letters on his right. C. Vale. He read it twice. The name meant nothing to him. He only knew, with a small surprised lurch, that fate had decided to be very particular tonight. He set down his glass. He smoothed his cuff. He walked across the ballroom toward table 4, and as he walked, he could feel Dominic walking 3 steps behind him with the long-suffering air of a man who had agreed, at the age of 20, to be a witness to whatever this would turn into. She did not look up when he arrived. She was reading the menu card. He cleared his throat. She turned a page on the menu card. "Excuse me," he said, in his best voice, the one he saved for board meetings and bartenders. She turned the menu card again. "Miss," he said. "Mister," she said, without looking up. "If you wanted my attention, you should have used your indoor voice when I walked in." He felt the heat rise to his collar. Around him, the rest of the table found their water glasses very interesting. Dominic, behind his shoulder, made a sound that might have been a cough, or might have been a small, private celebration. Adrian sat down. He pulled his chair in carefully. He turned his face toward her, and he said the only honest sentence he had said all evening. "That was rude of me. I'm sorry." She did not look up. She set the menu card down. She picked up her water and drank, slowly, like a woman who would not be hurried by anyone in a tuxedo. Then she said, still not looking at him, Are you sorry because you mean it? Or sorry because Margaret Hollis is 2 tables away, and you think she's going to put your shoes in a fountain? Both, he said, and surprised himself. She turned, finally, and looked at him. She had the kind of face that did not announce itself. It was an oval face, pale and grey-eyed, with a small, straight nose and a mouth that had been set very firmly all evening, but that softened slightly when she looked at him now. Her hair was the colour of pale wheat, pinned up behind her ears with 2 small mother-of-pearl combs that he could tell, even from this distance, were not new. She was perhaps 26. She wore no jewellery. She wore no perfume. She wore a navy gown that he now realised, looking at her closely, had constellations embroidered down the cuff in silver thread, the stars set with the patience of someone who had been counting them for weeks. He felt, suddenly, like a man who had just thrown a stone at a stained glass window. "What's your name?" he said. "Charlotte." "Charlotte what?" "Charlotte, who is going to ignore you for the rest of dinner." "Fair," he said. "Then will you at least let me apologize properly later?" "That depends," she said, "on whether you can do anything properly." She turned back to her menu. The waiter arrived and quietly poured her water. She thanked him by name, which Adrian noticed, because he himself had not bothered to learn it. She tucked a stray strand of pale hair behind her ear with a small, unhurried movement, and she did not look at Adrian Sterling again until the soup course had passed. Dominic, beside Adrian, leaned in and murmured, "I think I love her." "You don't," Adrian said. "No," Dominic said cheerfully. "But you might." Adrian opened his mouth to argue, and then he closed it again. Because somewhere in the part of him that had been frozen since his brother died, and his father had reorganized his life around the inheritance, something had moved 1/4 of an inch toward the light. Across the ballroom, Margaret Hollis caught his eye. She was watching him, the way an old falcon watches a young rabbit. He met her gaze. He held it. He nodded, once, very small, the way a man nods when he understands he has just been given a final warning. Margaret nodded back. Then she turned to her own table and lifted her flute, and the music slid into something gentler, and the ballroom kept on shining, and the velvet banner on the upper balcony kept on declaring that $9 million had been given tonight to the children of this city. It would be another 40 minutes before the donor's name was announced. Adrian had no idea, sitting beside her at table 4, that the woman whose dress he had just mocked was the reason the banner existed at all. He only knew that his appetite was gone, his amusement was gone, and a small, unfamiliar, almost frightened part of him kept watching her hands as she folded her napkin in her lap. Her hands were the hands of a woman who sewed. He had not noticed that either when she walked in. He had noticed only the dress. The first course was tomato consommé in small porcelain bowls. Adrian could not later have told anyone what it tasted like. He spent the entire course watching Charlotte Vale answer questions from the elderly philanthropist on her other side, a Mr. Redmond who had given to the Children's Hospital for 40 years and who clearly already adored her. Mr. Redmond asked her about her grandmother. Charlotte answered with 3 short sentences and a private smile. Mr. Redmond asked her about the embroidery on her cuff. Charlotte showed him, slowly, the way you might show a child a butterfly that had landed on your wrist. Adrian leaned slightly toward her shoulder. "You sewed that," he said. She did not look at him. "Yes." "Yourself?" "Yes." "All of it?" "Mr. Sterling," she said, still not turning, "if I tell you yes a 4th time, would you eat your soup?" "I'm not hungry." "Then drink some water. You're very pale." He laughed, a single short laugh, and several heads at the table turned, because Adrian Sterling was not a man known for laughing at himself. The laugh surprised him so much that he reached for his water glass and obeyed her. She turned then, just slightly, and looked at him. "Why are you still talking to me?" she said. It was not unkind. It was simply a question, the way she asked everything, with a low, even voice that had no trace of performance in it. He thought about lying. He thought about flirting. He thought about saying something charming and graceful and rehearsed. Instead he said, "Because if I stop, I think I'll go back to being the man who said that thing when you walked in, and I would prefer not to be him for a little while longer." There was a small silence. She looked at him. He had the peculiar sensation, under that grey gaze, of being checked the way Margaret Hollis must check the Foundation's books. Carefully, slowly, with no malice and no mercy. Then she said, "All right." "All right, what?" "All right. You can keep talking. But you don't get to ask me where I'm from, and you don't get to ask me what I do, and you don't get to ask me how I came to be at this gala. Those are the questions men ask when they want to put a woman in a category. I'm not interested in being in your category tonight. What can I ask you?" "Whatever you would ask a friend." He thought for a long moment. The string quartet drifted into a slow Brahms. A waiter cleared his bowl. Around them the ballroom murmured in the usual low, constant tide of money and gossip. "All right," he said. "Charlotte, what's the last thing that made you laugh?" She tilted her head. He saw her think about it. "My neighbor's dog," she said. "He's afraid of pigeons." "He's a small dog." "He's a very large dog. It's the size of him that makes it funny." He smiled. He did not mean to. It was not a smile he had ever practiced. It came up out of him the way water comes up out of a spring. And Dominic, 3 seats down, saw it, and very quietly slid his phone out of his pocket to make a note, because he had been keeping a written record of Adrian Sterling's facial expressions since college. And this one was new. Charlotte saw the smile. She did not return it. She returned to her water. But she did not turn away from him for the rest of the course. And when the second course arrived, she let him pour her wine, although she did not drink it. At 9:15, Margaret Hollis crossed the ballroom and stopped at Charlotte's elbow. She set a small folded card down beside Charlotte's water. 20 minutes, Margaret said. "If you still want to do this the quiet way." Charlotte slid the card under the rim of her plate and nodded once. Margaret looked across the table at Adrian Sterling. She did not introduce herself. She did not nod. She simply looked at him for a long, slow moment, with the kind of look that people who had built foundations in the 70s still knew how to deliver. And then she turned and walked away. Adrian watched her go. He turned to Charlotte. "Who," he said, "was that?" "That," Charlotte said, "was the woman who is going to put your shoes in the fountain if you say one more thing about my dress." "I have learned my lesson about the dress." "Good." Charlotte. Are you about to do something?" She glanced at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because she just gave you a card, and you went very still. I know what people look like when they're about to do something." She studied him for a moment. He had the feeling, again, of being weighed. "Maybe," she said, "but not in a way that concerns you." "You'd be surprised," he said. "What concerns me?" She did not answer that. She picked up her napkin, folded it once, set it beside her plate and stood up. "Excuse me," she said to the table at large. "I need a moment." She walked away from him, across the ballroom, between the candlelit tables, past the velvet banner, past the older couples turning slowly on the dance floor, and disappeared through a small service door near the kitchens. Margaret followed her, 3 minutes later, with a leather folder under her arm. Adrian sat at table 4 with his uneaten soup and his half-drunk wine and his unread place card, and he stared at the door she had gone through with the dawning, slightly dizzy realization that something was about to happen, and he had absolutely no idea what. Dominic leaned in. "Adrian," he said, "I think we should leave." "Why?" Because whatever is about to happen, I don't think you want to be in the room when it happens. Why not? Because I just saw Margaret Hollis give that woman a folder, and I just saw that woman's hands when she stood up, and her hands were perfectly steady. And that means whatever this is, she's been ready for it for a long time. Adrian looked at him. Stay, he said. Are you sure? I want to be in the room. Adrian, Dominic, I want to be in the room when it happens. I owe her that. Dominic looked at his oldest friend for a long moment, and then he sat back in his chair, and he said very quietly, All right, but for the record, I have never in 8 years heard you say you owe a woman anything. No, Adrian said. You haven't. He picked up his water. He drank slowly. He looked at the empty chair beside him, where Charlotte Vale's navy clutch sat, small and patient, against the white linen, like a closed door that was about to open. In the service corridor behind the kitchens, Charlotte stood very straight against the cool tile wall and let her eyes close for one full breath. Margaret stepped beside her and did not speak. The kitchen behind them clattered softly. Somewhere in the next room, a chef shouted in French. The corridor smelled of bread and lavender and floor polish. I can still announce it without you, Margaret said. I know. You don't have to walk back out there. I will go and read the words. The board will applaud. The press will write what they always write. The hospital will get its money. You can leave through the kitchen, Charlie. The car is already at the loading dock. Charlotte opened her eyes. She looked at the older woman. Margaret's face was as kind as it had ever been, and as unyielding, because that was the trick of Margaret Hollis. She had loved her grandmother for 40 years, and she had never once told Eleanor what to do, but she had always been ready to pick her up. If I leave, Charlotte said, does that mean he wins? He doesn't matter. He does. He matters because if I run home to Connecticut tonight because a man in a tuxedo laughed at my dress, then every other woman in this city who has ever sewn something for herself, every woman who has ever walked into a room where she didn't match the wallpaper, every woman who has ever been laughed at by a sterling, will know that I ran. And that is not what my grandmother taught me to do. Margaret's eyes shone, just for a moment, the way they had shone at Eleanor's funeral. All right, sweetheart. All right. Then we go back out there, and you let me announce the gift. And if you want to stay anonymous, we stay anonymous, and the Sterling boy goes on thinking you're a girl in a thrift shop dress, and he loses his chance. And if I don't? Then we tell them, Margaret said, and he learns. Charlotte was quiet for a long time. The kitchen clattered. A line cook laughed. A door swung. She thought of her grandmother, standing in the upstairs sitting room of the Connecticut Lake House, holding the silver thread up to the lamp and saying, Charlie, my love, you don't sew constellations into your hem so other people will see them. You sew them so that you remember, every time you walk into a room, that the sky is on you. Tell them, she said. Margaret blinked once. You're sure? I'm sure. Charlie, Margaret, let him learn. Margaret reached up and touched her cheek, very briefly, and then she opened the leather folder, took out a single sheet of paper, smoothed it flat against the wall, and walked back through the swinging service door into the ballroom. Charlotte stood alone in the corridor for one more breath. Then she straightened her shoulders, smoothed the embroidered cuff of her navy gown, and followed. She walked back into the ballroom 3 minutes later. The string quartet had quieted. The dance floor had cleared. Margaret Hollis was already standing on the small raised stage beside the velvet banner, with the leather folder open in her hands and a microphone tilted gently toward her chin. Adrian saw Charlotte walk back in. He half rose at his chair, instinctively, the way a man rises when a friend enters a room. He did not know why he was doing it. He sat back down. She did not look at him. She walked past table 4 without a glance and stopped at the foot of the stage steps, where Margaret could see her. Margaret tapped the microphone. The ballroom went quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "thank you for coming tonight. 3 years ago, the Vale Foundation made a private commitment to the city's children's hospital. Tonight, that commitment becomes public. $9 million have been transferred this evening to the hospital's pediatric oncology wing, which will be expanded over the next 18 months to serve 400 additional children a year. We are honored this evening by the presence of the donor." Adrian set down his glass. He set it down very carefully because his hand had gone strange. "It is my honor," Margaret said, "to introduce her to you, with her permission, for the first time in public. The Vale Foundation is, and has always been, the work of one woman. Her grandmother, Eleanor Vale, founded our textile mills. Tonight, on what would have been Eleanor's 88th birthday, we honor her granddaughter, who has carried her work forward." Margaret looked down off the stage. "Charlotte Vale." Charlotte stepped up. The ballroom did not, for one full second, react. Adrian later thought of that second often, the way one thinks of a moment between a struck match and a flame. He saw the heads turn. He saw the woman near the bar, the one who had laughed an hour earlier, set down her glass in slow motion. He saw Vivian Marchetti, the socialite he had brought as a not-quite date, raise both perfectly threaded eyebrows in a stunned rictus he had never seen on her before. He saw the cellist, 2 rows behind the stage, lift her bow in mid-arc and forget what she was supposed to do with it. He saw Charlotte Vale walk up the 3 small steps to the stage in her hand-sewn navy gown, with the constellations embroidered along the cuff, and he saw her stand beside the woman who had looked at him earlier the way a falcon looks at a rabbit, and he saw her take the microphone in steady hands. He saw her look out across the ballroom. He saw her find his face. "Good evening," Charlotte said, and her voice was clear and low, and it was the voice of a woman who had been ready for this for a long time. "My grandmother used to say that if you have the means to help a child, you do not need a bank account. You need a bank account and a quiet morning. So I will keep this short, because she would not have liked a long speech. The hospital will get the money, the children will get the rooms, and every nurse on that floor is getting a raise." The ballroom laughed, quick and startled and grateful. She let them. She waited. "Thank you to Margaret Hollis, who has been my grandmother's right hand and now is mine. Thank you to the staff of the hospital, who do the work I will never do. And thank you to all of you in this room, who have given anything to anyone. We are not in this room to be admired. We are in this room because the world is not yet what it should be. Good night." She set the microphone down on the stand. She stepped down off the stage. The applause rose and rose and rose, and somewhere in the middle of it, Vivian Marchetti turned slowly and looked at Adrian Sterling with an expression of pure anthropological astonishment. And Dominic Park, 3 seats away, leaned into his oldest friend and said, very quietly, "Adrian, my brother, I have known you 23 years, and I have never, in 23 years, seen you look like that." Adrian did not answer. He could not answer. He was watching her walk back down off the stage, past table 4, past his chair, without one glance in his direction, and out the brass doors of the Beaumont ballroom into the autumn night. She did not look back. That was the second time in one evening that she had not looked back. He stood up from table 4. He did not know he was standing. His chair scraped behind him. Vivian said something sharp in his ear. He did not hear her. He walked toward the brass doors. He walked the length of the ballroom in his Milan tuxedo, with the small platinum cufflinks engraved JBS, past the velvet banner, past the string quartet, past the dance floor, and he was almost at the doors when Margaret Hollis stepped neatly into his path. She did not raise her voice. "Mr. Sterling." "Excuse me." "I will not excuse you." He stopped. "Mr. Sterling," Margaret said pleasantly, "I have known that young woman since she was 9 years old. I held her grandmother's hand the night her grandmother died. I sat with her on the floor of this city for 3 weeks afterward, and I watched her sit down at a sewing table in Connecticut and stitch silver constellations into the hem of a navy gown, because that is how she grieves. So I am going to tell you something you will not enjoy." He waited. "You do not get to walk through that door tonight. Not after her. Do you understand?" He swallowed. He nodded. "Tomorrow morning," Margaret said, "you will walk into the offices of the Vail Foundation in Brooklyn. You will walk in like a man, not like a Sterling. You will apologize to her in private, not in front of cameras, not in front of me, not in front of your father. And if she chooses to forgive you, that is her gift, and you will receive it like a gift. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She stepped aside. He did not walk through the brass doors. He turned instead and walked back to table 4, and he sat down beside the empty chair where Charlotte Vale's navy clutch had been, and he stared at the white linen for a long, long time. Behind him, the string quartet began again. The ballroom resumed its quiet, polished rhythm. The velvet banner kept its promise. And somewhere in the autumn dark of Manhattan, a quiet woman in a hand-sewn navy gown was being driven home, alone, in the back of a black sedan, with her hands folded in her lap and her grandmother's mother-of-pearl combs gleaming faintly in her pale hair. She was not crying. She was not smiling. She was thinking, very calmly, about whether she would let him in tomorrow. By morning, the photograph was everywhere. Parker Lynn, the gossip columnist for the Manhattan Pulse, had been at the gala under the cover of a press wristband and a cheap rented tuxedo. He had filmed the entire arrival sequence from the upper balcony. He had filmed the laugh. He had filmed the line about thrift shops. He had filmed the announcement. And he had cut it together by 3 in the morning and posted it at 6 with the headline, "Billionaire mocks charity donor's dress, not knowing she gave $9 million. The video was at 4 million views by 9. By 10, it was 11 million. By noon, the Sterling Capital press team had been pulled into an emergency meeting, and Marcus Sterling, Adrian's father, had broken 3 of his own rules in 20 minutes by raising his voice on a phone call. Adrian sat in the corner office on the 43rd floor with the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him and watched, on his own computer, the video of himself laughing at a woman in a navy gown. He did not look away. He watched it twice. The third time he turned the sound off and watched only her face. She did not flinch. Even on the second viewing, even on the third, she did not flinch. She did not slow. She did not even glance toward him. She walked the length of the ballroom with her shoulders low and her chin level, the way a woman walks who has been raised by a grandmother who taught her that other people's noise is not her weather. He closed the laptop. He stood up. He walked to the window. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass and looked down at the city 43 stories below. And he thought, very clearly, for the first time in possibly his entire adult life, I would like to be a different man than I was last night. Behind him, his assistant knocked. "Mr. Sterling?" "Yes." "Your father is on line 1. The PR firm is on line 2. Your sister is on line 3. Vivian Marchetti is on line 4. Hold all of them. All of them. All of them, Lila, please." His assistant, Lila, who had worked for him for 3 years and had never once heard him say please before that morning, paused and then said, "Yes, sir." She closed the door. Adrian stood at the window for another full minute. Then he turned, picked up his coat, walked past Lila's desk without looking at any of the 4 blinking phone lines, and rode the elevator down to the lobby, with his hands in his pockets and his mouth set in a line. He took a taxi to Brooklyn. The Vale Foundation occupied the top floor of a converted textile warehouse on a quiet street near the water. The brick was old, the windows were tall. The elevator was a freight elevator with a hand-pulled iron gate. The lobby was a small, plain room with 2 old leather chairs and a single-framed black-and-white photograph of an older woman at a sewing table, smiling faintly at someone off-camera. The photograph had no caption. He stood in front of it for a long time before he understood who it was. The receptionist was a young woman of perhaps 23, dark-haired, in a soft grey cardigan, with a nameplate that said Iris in small black letters. She looked up. She knew exactly who he was. She did not pretend. "Mr. Sterling." "I'm here to see Charlotte Vale." "I know." "Is she in?" Iris glanced at the screen of her laptop, and then at the closed door behind her, and then back at him. "Yes," she said, "she's in. But Mr. Sterling, I have to ask you something first." "All right." "Are you here because she's the donor, or are you here because of last night?" He felt the question land. He did not answer right away. Iris waited. She had the patient stillness of a young woman who had learned, in 3 years of working in a small foundation office, how to read people who walked through the door wanting something. "I'm here," he said slowly, "because I said something to a woman last night that I should not have said. The donation has nothing to do with my apology. I would have come either way." Iris studied him. "All right," she said finally. "Sit down. I'll see if she'll take you." He sat. The leather chair creaked. He clasped his hands in his lap. Iris picked up the office phone, pressed an internal extension, and said softly, "Charlie, he's here. He says it's not because of the donation. I believe him." There was a long pause. Then Iris said, "Yes, all right." She set down the phone. "She'll see you. 5 minutes. Through that door." He stood. He walked through the door. The office was a long, narrow room, white-painted brick, with tall windows and a wooden floor and an old kilim rug in the center. There was a desk at the far end, plain and oak. There was a green leather sofa under the windows, much patched, and on the wall above the sofa there hung a single framed scrap of embroidery, perhaps 15 inches square, a navy fabric with a constellation stitched in silver thread, very small, very precise. Beside it, in a smaller frame, was a black and white photograph of the same older woman in the lobby, this time leaning over a sewing table beside a small, intent child of perhaps 9. He stood in the doorway. Charlotte was at the desk, in a soft camel sweater and dark jeans, with her pale hair pinned back in a low knot. She looked up. She did not smile. She did not stand. "Mr. Sterling." "Miss Vale." "Sit down." He crossed the room. He sat in the leather armchair opposite her desk. He folded his hands. He looked at her. She looked back. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes." "I was rude. I was cruel. I was unbearable. I made a joke about your dress because it amused me to be cruel in public, and I am ashamed." "Go on." "I did not know, when I made that joke, that you were the donor." "That doesn't matter." "I know." "Mr. Sterling, if I had been a girl in a borrowed dress who was crashing a charity gala because she had nowhere else to be on a Friday night, your joke would still have been cruel." "I know." "Then say that part." He swallowed. "It would have been cruel either way," he said. "I am not sorry because of who you are. I am sorry because of what I did." There was a long silence. Outside, a barge moved slowly up the East River. A pigeon landed on the windowsill and looked indignant. Inside, Charlotte Vale studied the man across her desk, and Adrian Sterling sat very still and waited. Finally, she said, "Why did you come here today?" "Because Margaret Honest told me to." That's an honest answer. I would have come anyway, but she made it impossible to come tomorrow. Yes, Charlotte said. She does that. She also told me, he said after a moment, that I should come in like a man and not like a sterling. I'm trying to figure out what that means. She tilted her head. You don't know the difference? Not yet. Mr. Sterling, a sterling walks into a room and decides what the room is. A man walks into a room and asks what the room needs. He let that sit. All right. You're going to ask me what this room needs. What does this room need? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, This room needs a man who, when he walks out of here, will not make a public statement, will not give a press tour, will not have his PR firm post a long apology video on his behalf, will not go on a podcast, will go home, will sit with what he did, will not perform the apology for the audience. That's what this room needs. All right. That's a hard ask. My father is going to want a statement. I'm sure he is. He is going to want me to stand on a stage and read words. And you are going to tell him no. I am going to tell him no. She held his eyes for a long moment. He did not look away. He had never in his life sat opposite a woman in a sweater in a Brooklyn warehouse and felt this scene. All right, she said. Then we are done here. That's it. That's it. You're not going to make me suffer. Mr. Sterling, Charlotte said, with the smallest possible softening at the corner of her mouth. I have a foundation to run. I do not have time to make grown men suffer. The suffering, if there is any, is on you to carry. I'm not your jailer. He almost laughed. He did not, because he understood that laughter, in this room on this morning, was a privilege he had not yet earned. Will I see you again? He said. She paused. Mr. Sterling, we are about to be in a small public storm together for at least 2 weeks. The press will follow us. You will see me at events. You will see me on cameras. You will see me from across rooms. But that is not what you are asking. No. What you are asking is whether, when this storm passes, there is any door you can knock on. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. Adrian Sterling, who had walked into rooms his entire life knowing exactly what they contained, did not know what she was going to say. It was the first time in possibly his adult life that he had not known. Maybe, she said. Maybe. Yes, maybe. That is all you get this morning. Now go home. Don't make a statement. Don't post anything. Don't speak to a single reporter. Do you understand? Yes. He stood. He set his hand on the back of the chair. He did not, somehow, want to leave. He looked at the framed embroidery above the sofa, the constellation stitched in silver thread, and then back at her, and he understood, for the first time, that he was looking at the same hand. You sewed that, he said quietly. I sewed that. How old were you? 9. And your grandmother taught you? She taught me. Where is she now? She's gone. He nodded slowly, and he did not say I'm sorry, because he had said sorry enough today, and because he understood, suddenly, that the sky was on her, exactly the way her grandmother had told her, and that the constellations on the cuff of her gown were not decoration. They were memory. Goodbye, Miss Vale, he said. Goodbye, Mr. Sterling. He walked out. He passed Iris, who did not look up. He took the freight elevator down. He stepped out onto the cold Brooklyn street, and he walked 4 blocks in the wrong direction before he realized he had been walking with his eyes blurred, and he stopped at a corner cafe and ordered a black coffee, and sat at a small wooden table and did, for the first time in 11 years, since the morning his older brother had not come home. The simple, terrible, healing thing, but he had not let himself do in 11 years. He sat with what he had done. He drank his coffee. He did not check his phone. He did not call his father. He did not post a statement. He did not look up at the small television over the bar, where Parker Lynn's video was still playing on mute, where his own face was still laughing, where a young woman in a navy gown was still walking across a ballroom and not looking back. When he finally stood up, an hour later, he was not yet a different man. But he was, perhaps, a man who could one day become a different man. And that, his older brother had told him once, in the hospital corridor a week before he died, was the only honest beginning anyone ever got. The storm was bigger than either of them had expected. By the next morning, the video had reached 41 million views. By the morning after that, it was being played on 3 network morning shows, 2 cable evening shows, and on every commuter train screen in Manhattan. The press camped outside the Vail Foundation in Brooklyn. They camped outside Sterling Capitol on Park Avenue. They tried, very hard, to camp outside Charlotte's small brownstone in Carroll Gardens, until Margaret Hollis, who was the daughter and granddaughter and great-granddaughter of women who did not tolerate being camped on, made 3 phone calls and produced a small, polite, immovable security detail, who stood on the stoop in dark coats and said good morning to every reporter, and let no reporter past. Charlotte did not give a single interview. She did not post anything. She kept showing up to the office at 8, having walked through the back alley with her hood up, and she kept running the foundation. And at 6, she went home, through the same alley, with Iris on one side, and a quiet woman from the security detail on the other, and she did not look at a single camera. Adrian, for his part, kept his promise. He gave no statement. He went on no podcast. He did not allow Sterling Capitol to release the 7 separate apology drafts that the PR firm produced over 48 hours, each one more groveling than the last. His father, Marcus Sterling, came to his office on the second morning and stood in the doorway with his coat still on and said, very quietly, "Adrian, you are going to release a statement, or I am going to release one for you." Adrian did not look up from his desk. "No, Dad." "Excuse me." I said no. "Adrian, I gave my word. I'm not breaking it. If you release something on the firm's letterhead, I will publicly contradict it within the hour. You can do whatever you like." There was a long silence. Marcus Sterling was 62, silver-haired, narrow-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence had been engineered, over 40 years, to fill any doorway he entered. He filled this doorway. His son did not look up. Finally, Marcus said, "Who is this woman?" "Her name is Charlotte Vail. I know her name. I read the papers. Who is she to you?" Adrian set down his pen. "I don't know yet," he said. "Maybe nobody. Maybe someone. It's not my decision." "It is not your decision." "No, Dad, it's not. That's what I'm trying to learn." His father stood in the doorway for another long moment, and then, surprisingly, he closed the door from the outside and walked away. He did not speak to Adrian for the rest of the day. The next morning, the 7 apology drafts were quietly deleted from the PR firm's queue, and a 1-sentence note appeared on Adrian's desk in his father's handwriting. "Whatever you are doing, keep doing it. M." Adrian did not know, until much later, that this was the closest his father had come in 11 years to forgiving him for outliving his older brother. On the 4th day, the story turned. Parker Lynn, who had filmed the original video, posted a follow-up. The follow-up included a 3-minute compilation of every Vail Foundation grant the Public Records Office had on file, a wing of the Children's Hospital, a scholarship for first-generation textile workers' daughters, a program that bought sewing machines for women's shelters and trained the residents in tailoring as a paying skill, a small library in a Connecticut town where Eleanor Vail had grown up, 8 years of gifts. 8 years of quiet. Not one press release. The headline read, "She gave 9 million quietly. She has been giving quietly her whole life." The internet, which 2 days earlier had been hunting Adrian Sterling, turned its head with the unanimity of a flock of starlings and began instead to fall in love with Charlotte Vale. Margaret Hollis, who had been preparing for this exact pivot since hour one, stepped neatly into the lane the press had opened. She gave a single, careful interview to the New York Times in the Foundation's small lobby, beside the framed photograph of Eleanor at the sewing table. She did not mention Adrian Sterling. She did not need to. She spoke about Eleanor. She spoke about the textile mill. She spoke about the night, 26 years earlier, when Eleanor had taught a 9-year-old to thread a needle by lamplight, and had told her that the sky was on her. She spoke about the navy gown. She did not say who had sewn it. The interviewer did not need to be told. The piece ran on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, the Children's Hospital had received an additional $19 million in unsolicited public donations, almost all of it in increments of $10 and $20 and $50, from people who had watched the original video and the follow-up and Margaret's interview and had cried at their kitchen tables. Charlotte read the donation reports each evening with Iris and Margaret in the small office. She did not cry. She did not cheer. She nodded at each line item, and at the end of the third evening, she set down the page, looked across the desk at Margaret, and said, "If we hire fast, we can open the wing 6 months early." "We can hire fast," Margaret said. "Then we hire fast." "Charlie, you haven't slept. I'll sleep when the wing opens. That's 6 months. Then I'll sleep in 6 months." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Iris, in the doorway, made a small, tactful, retreating motion. "Sweetheart," Margaret said, "you also have not asked me in 3 days whether Adrian Sterling has called." Charlotte's pen paused. "He hasn't called," she said. "He hasn't called the Foundation, that is true. Has he called you? He has not called me. Has he called anyone? Charlie, he is, as far as I can tell, doing exactly what you asked him to do." Which is nothing, publicly. He has not made a single statement. He has not posted. He has not given a single interview. He has, by the count of 3 different press monitors, gone to his office, gone home, gone to the office, gone home, gone to the office, gone home, and once gone to a small coffee shop in Brooklyn. In Brooklyn. Yes, the day after he came here. He sat alone for an hour. He did not look at his phone. The barista told the reporter, who told another reporter, who told me. Charlotte did not speak for a moment. "Margaret." "Yes." "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret folded her hands on the desk. She had silver rings on 3 fingers. She had Eleanor's wedding band on her left thumb, which she had worn since the funeral. She looked at the young woman across from her with the eyes of a 64-year-old woman who had once, 40 years earlier, also been a young woman trying to decide whether to let someone in. "I am telling you," she said, "because you are running yourself into the ground, and the only thing in the past 4 days that has made you smile, even briefly, was when Iris told you about the man at the coffee shop. I am telling you because I am old, and because there is a long, quiet line of women in our family who did not let anyone in, and the line is full of regrets. I am telling you because I want you to be the one who breaks the line." Charlotte set down her pen. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He doesn't get to walk through the door yet." "No, sweetheart, of course he doesn't. But maybe the door doesn't have to be locked." "That," Margaret said, smiling for the first time in 4 days, "is a different sentence." 2 weeks passed, then 3. The press storm subsided into a slower, gentler weather pattern. The wing of the Children's Hospital broke ground 6 months ahead of schedule, in a small private ceremony with no banner. Charlotte attended in jeans and the camel sweater. She brought sandwiches for the construction crew. Iris took photographs that no one was allowed to publish. Margaret read a brief statement and ate 2 sandwiches. Adrian was not invited. Adrian did not come. He did, however, on a cold Friday in early November, walk into the offices of the Sterling Capital legal team and sign a private commitment to fund the second floor of the same wing for an additional $12 million, anonymously, with the explicit condition that the donation never be publicly tied to the Sterling name. The legal team did not understand. His father did not understand. Marcus Sterling stood in the doorway again, this time without his coat, and said, "Son, anonymously. Anonymously. Are you trying to impress her?" Adrian set down the pen. He looked up at his father. "No," he said. "I'm trying to be like her." His father looked at him for a long, slow moment, and Adrian saw something cross his father's face that he had not seen in 11 years, since the morning the doctor had walked into the hospital corridor and said the word that had broken their family in half. It was a look of recognition. Marcus Sterling did not speak. He nodded once. He walked out of the office. He closed the door. The donation went through that afternoon. The hospital received it in the early evening. Margaret Hollis was the only person at the foundation who knew where it had come from, because Margaret Hollis knew everything. And she did not tell Charlotte. Not for 2 more weeks. In the second week of November, Charlotte went home to Connecticut. She had been going up to the lake house alone every November since her grandmother had died. 3 days, sometimes 4. The Connecticut house was a small, white wooden cottage on the edge of a long, narrow lake, surrounded by pine and birch, and one stubborn old apple tree. Inside there was a green leather sofa, a brick fireplace, a sewing table by the window, and on every wall the small framed scraps of embroidery that Eleanor had made over 50 years. There was no television. There was poor cell service. There was a single old kettle on a wood stove. There was the smell of pine and wood smoke and bread. Charlotte drove up on a Friday morning in a small blue Volvo that had belonged to her grandmother. She arrived a little past noon. She unlocked the door. She lit the wood stove. She made tea. She sat on the green leather sofa with a quilt over her knees, and she let, for the first time in 3 weeks, the shape of her own grief settle around her shoulders again. She had cried in front of nobody for a long time. She did not cry now. She simply let the silence in. By 2 o'clock, she had unpacked, swept, and started a small loaf of bread. By 3, she was sitting at her grandmother's sewing table by the window, threading a needle with silver thread, with a square of new navy linen across her lap. She did not know yet what she was going to embroider on it. By 3:15, a black town car turned slowly off the main road, drove down the dirt lane, and stopped at the gate of the cottage. She heard the engine. She did not move at first. Cars came down this lane occasionally, mostly mistaken hikers turning around. She kept threading. The engine cut. A door opened. A door closed. Footsteps on the gravel. They stopped at the gate. They did not open it. Charlotte set down the needle. She walked to the window. She lifted the curtain. Adrian Sterling was standing at the gate of her grandmother's cottage in a dark grey overcoat, with his hands in his pockets, with his collar turned up against the cold, with his breath rising in small grey clouds. Alone. He did not have a phone in his hand. He did not have a bouquet. He did not have a PR person sitting in the car. The car, she could see now, was empty. The driver gone, parked 30 feet down the lane, like a man giving the scene its privacy. Adrian was not opening the gate. He was just standing there. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she set down the curtain. She walked to the front door. She put on her grandmother's old wool coat. She opened the door. She walked across the small yard, between the two pines, past the apple tree, to the gate. She stopped on her side of it. He stopped on his side of it. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The lake was very still behind her. A loon called once, far off. "How did you find this place?" she said finally. "I asked Margaret." "Margaret told you." "Margaret told me on 3 conditions. That I come alone, that I come without cameras, that I leave the moment you ask me to leave." "Are those her conditions, or yours?" "Hers. Mine were the same." "How long have you been driving?" 4 hours. "From where?" "From the city." "That is too long for a man without a coffee." She watched the corner of his mouth move slightly, the way a man's mouth moves when he is trying not to be a man who laughs in front of a woman who has not yet given him permission. "I had coffee at a place outside Hartford," he said. "Was it bad?" "It was terrible." "Good." He looked down at the gate latch. He looked up at her. "Charlotte." "Mr. Sterling, may I come inside?" She thought about it. She thought about it for a long, long time. He stood patiently. He did not press. He did not, even by accident, lean against the gate. Because he understood, in some part of himself he had not known he had, that even leaning would be a small claim on her property and her peace. He simply stood, hands in pockets, breath rising, waiting. Finally, she said, "No." He nodded. He nodded the way a man nods when he has known, for the entire 4-hour drive, that the answer might be no. "All right," he said. "Not yet." He looked up. "Not yet." "Mr. Sterling." "Yes." "I am going to walk down to the lake. There is a bench. It is on this side of the gate. You may, if you wish, walk down on your side of the lane. There is a path on your side. The path comes out at the same place. You may sit on the other end of the bench. You may not sit closer than the other end. We will, for 1 hour, sit on a bench, and we will talk. And at the end of the hour, you will get back in your car, and you will drive 4 hours back to the city. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Then come on." She walked. He walked on his side. They reached the bench. It was an old wooden bench, weathered grey, set on a small flat rock that overlooked the lake. The wind off the water was cold. She sat at one end. He sat, very carefully, at the other end. The bench was perhaps 5 feet long. There was a clear 3 feet of empty wood between them. She watched the lake. He watched her, watching the lake. After a long minute, she said, "Why did you give 12 million to the second floor?" He did not look at her. "Margaret told you." "Margaret told me this morning. That's why I left for the lake at noon. I needed to think before you found me." "I'm sorry I found you." "You're not." "No," he said. "I'm not." There was a silence. He said, "I gave it because I wanted to be like you." That sounds smaller than it is. I've spent my whole life being like my father. I've spent my whole life walking into rooms and deciding what the rooms were. The night at the Beaumont, you walked into a room, and you did not decide what the room was. And somehow the whole room rearranged itself around you anyway. I would like to know how to do that. I do not. I am asking to learn. She did not answer right away. She watched the lake. A small brown duck paddled along the far shore. "Mr. Sterling." "Adrian." "Adrian, you did not learn how to do that in 3 weeks." "I know." "You did not learn how to do that by writing a check." "I know." "You will not learn it by sitting on a bench with me for 1 hour." "I know." "Then why are you here?" He thought about it. He took his time. He had, she realized now, learned in the last 3 weeks how to take his time before answering questions. "Because I would like," he said, "to begin." She closed her eyes. The wind moved along her cheek. "All right," she said. "All right. You may begin." She opened her eyes. She looked, finally, across the 3 feet of weathered wood, at the man at the other end of the bench. He was not the man she had seen across the ballroom 4 weeks ago. He was the same body, in the same height, with the same dark hair and the same sharp jaw. But the face was different. There was a quietness around his mouth. There was a small line between his eyebrows that had not been there before. There was no performance in his eyes. She thought, very briefly, of her grandmother at the sewing table by lamplight, and of the words that her grandmother had said to her about beginnings. "You don't begin in the middle of the room, Charlie. You begin at the door." "All right," she said again, more softly. "Adrian, let's begin." They sat on the bench for an hour. They talked. He told her about his older brother, who had died at 24, 11 years ago, of a slow illness whose name he no longer used. He told her about the platinum cufflinks engraved JBS. He told her about his father, who had not laughed in 11 years. He told her, very carefully, about the moment in the ballroom when he had seen her walk in and had, for reasons he did not yet understand, mocked her dress. He told her that he believed, now, that he had done it because she had walked into a room without performing, and he had not, in his entire life, met someone who did not perform. And his first instinct, like a child raised by wolves, had been to bare his teeth. He told her that he was ashamed. He told her that he was not asking for forgiveness. He told her that he was asking only to be allowed to keep coming back. She listened. She did not interrupt. She watched the lake. She watched the brown duck, which had by now paddled all the way to the dock and was looking up at her, hopefully, for crumbs that she did not have. She watched her own hands, folded in her lap, and she thought of her grandmother's hands, and of the silver thread, and of the constellations on the cuff of a navy gown. When he was done, she sat for a long minute in silence. Then she said, "Adrian." "Yes." "You may come back." He did not move. "You may come back," she said, "in 2 weeks. To the city, to the foundation. Iris will know your name. You will not, when you come, bring flowers or a check or a press release. You will bring yourself, and only yourself. You will sit in the lobby for 10 minutes before I see you. You will look at the photograph on the wall. You will think about who you are coming to see. Then I will see you. We will have tea. You will go home. We will do this every 2 weeks until I tell you otherwise. Do you understand?" "Yes." "This is not a relationship." "I know." "This is a beginning." "I know." "Now," she said, "stand up. Go back to your car. Drive 4 hours to the city. Have dinner alone. Sleep. Tomorrow, do good work. And in 2 weeks, come and see me." He stood. He did not, she noticed, move toward her. He buttoned his coat. He turned, walked back down the path on his side of the lane, opened the door of the black town car, and got in. The car turned slowly in the dirt lane and drove away. She watched the tail lights until they disappeared around the bend. Then she sat alone on the bench for another 20 minutes, with the cold wind moving across her cheek, and she let, for the first time in 11 months, since her last birthday, the smallest possible smile touch the corner of her mouth. Then she went inside. She put more wood on the fire. She made another cup of tea. She sat down at her grandmother's sewing table by the window. She picked up the silver thread. She picked up the new square of navy linen. She thought, for a moment, about what to embroider on it. She decided, finally, on a small new constellation, one that her grandmother had not taught her, one she had been making up, slowly, in her head, for 3 weeks. She named it, privately, the bench. A year later, on a cold Friday in November, the Beaumont ballroom was set again for a charity gala. Crystal chandeliers spilled gold across the marble. A string quartet glided through a slow waltz. Along the upper balcony, a velvet banner unfurled in deep ivory letters. Tonight, we honor the opening of the Pediatric Oncology Wing. Every child has a chance. The wing had opened on time. It had opened, in fact, 6 months early. Charlotte Vale stepped through the brass doors at exactly 5 minutes past 8, in a deep navy gown she had sewn with her own hands, with constellations embroidered down the cuff in silver thread. And beside her, in a black tuxedo with small platinum cufflinks engraved JBS, walked Adrian Sterling. He did not have his hand on the small of her back. He did not announce her. He walked half a step behind her, the way a man walks beside a woman whose room he has finally learned not to decide. Margaret Hollis, on the small raised stage, lifted a flute and saw them come in. Iris, at the donor table, set down her menu and smiled. Dominic Park, at the bar, put down his glass and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "There he is." Across the ballroom, near the far wall, a young woman in a slightly too plain dress was standing alone, holding a single glass of water, looking very carefully at the marble floor. Beside her, a man in a tuxedo had just laughed at something. The young woman had not flinched, but the corner of her mouth had tightened, in the way Charlotte's mouth had tightened a year earlier, when a man she did not know had laughed at her in a room she had paid for. Charlotte saw her. Adrian saw her see her. Charlotte glanced up at him. He glanced down at her. They did not need to speak. They crossed the ballroom together. They walked past the velvet banner, past the string quartet, past the dance floor. They reached the young woman in the slightly too plain dress, and Charlotte stopped beside her. "Hello," she said gently. The young woman looked up. Her eyes were wide and dark and embarrassed. "Hello. You sewed your dress yourself?" The young woman blinked. She looked down at it. "How did you know?" "Because the seam at your shoulder is hand-stitched. Machines don't make that stitch. And because I sewed mine too." She held out the embroidered cuff of her own gown. The young woman looked at it. The young woman stared at it. The young woman, after a long moment, looked up at Charlotte with an expression that Charlotte recognized, because Charlotte had once worn it herself. It was the expression of a woman who had been about to apologize for her dress, and who, suddenly, did not have to. "I'm Charlotte," Charlotte said. "This is Adrian. Walk with us, please. I would like to introduce you to Margaret Hollis. She runs this foundation. She likes women who sew their own clothes." The young woman did not speak. She nodded. She walked. The man in the tuxedo who had laughed earlier was still standing nearby. He saw them go. He saw who they were. He saw Charlotte Vale guide a young woman in a plain dress across his line of sight without looking at him. He saw Adrian Sterling, half a step behind her, glance once, briefly, at him, and then look away, with no expression at all. The man in the tuxedo set down his glass. He did not know it yet, but he had, that evening, been mocked. It was the gentlest mocking of his entire life. It had been done without a single word. It had been done by the way two people had simply not stopped at his table. And he would think about it, later, on the long ride home. The way Adrian Sterling had thought, a year earlier, about a woman in a navy gown who had not flinched. By the dance floor, Margaret Hollis met Charlotte and the young woman with the slightly too plain dress. She greeted the young woman warmly, by name, because Margaret Hollis was a woman who had, in the last year, made it her quiet business to know the names of every young woman who came to a Vale Foundation event in a dress she had sewn herself. There were now 7 of them. By next year, Charlotte planned, there would be 20. Adrian stepped back. He let them have the moment. He found Dominic at the bar. "How does it look?" he said. Dominic did not turn from the dance floor. "It looks," he said, "like a woman in a navy gown introducing a young woman in a plain dress to the chairwoman of a foundation, while half the ballroom pretends not to watch. It looks the way it looks every time, Adrian." "Yes." "You did good." "She did good." "You did good," Dominic said again, "by getting out of the way." Adrian smiled. It was the slow, almost private smile that had begun, 11 months earlier, on a cold bench at the edge of a Connecticut lake, and that had, in the months since, taught itself, very slowly, how to live on his face. He picked up a glass of water. He turned. He watched her cross the ballroom. She was leaning down, slightly, listening to the young woman with the plain dress. She had her hand, very lightly, on the young woman's elbow, in the way that her grandmother had once put a hand on Charlotte's elbow at exactly her age. She was smiling. The young woman was smiling. Margaret Hollis, beside them, was already opening a leather folder. Adrian Sterling watched her, and he thought of the only thing his older brother had ever told him in the hospital corridor the week before he died. He had told Adrian that the only honest beginning anyone got was sitting with what they had done, and he had told him that the only honest middle anyone got was learning, slowly, how to stand half a step behind the right woman and let her do her work. He had not understood it at 20. He understood it now. The string quartet drifted into a slow Brahms. The chandeliers spilled gold across the marble. The velvet banner kept its promise, and along the cuff of a hand-sewn navy gown, the constellations Eleanor Vale had taught her granddaughter to stitch by lamplight 26 years earlier, caught the light in small, precise, silver flashes. She had told Charlotte once, when Charlotte was 9, that the sky was on her. Tonight, finally, in a ballroom full of light, with Adrian Sterling half a step behind her, and a young woman in a plain dress at her elbow, and Margaret Hollis at the door, and Iris at the donor table, and the whole long, quiet line of women in her family unbroken at last behind her. Charlotte Vale walked across the marble, with her shoulders low and her chin level. The sky was on her, and she did not look back.